Hello malt mates, welcome to the Whisky Bothy, welcome to review number 1143, extras for extra content, extra opinion, occasionally extra rants, but in this occasion it's extra information and it relates to a specific single malt Scotch whisky brand called Clynelish, which you will find the distillery is located just north of Inverness on the east coast of Scotland, and the distillery is in the North Highland region, and it has a checkered history. An interesting history, but quite a checkered history, because for long enough Clynelish was of no interest to single malt drinkers. It was primarily, like so many other distilleries, exclusively for blend filler, to basically go in with 70% content from column still mixed mash bill grain Scotch whisky with single malt whisky, where the single malt adds a little bit substance, a bit character, and makes the flavour a little more complex. And Clynelish very much had that role and did it very well. Effervescent, medium weighted, fruity, complex, sensation rich, intense style of single malt. But in recent years, when the official bottling started to appear, the reputation of Clynelish really took off because people were discovering a singularity to the single malt that really stood out, and that was a waxiness. Now, a waxiness comes from a certain chemical composition, not just in the making of the new make spirit, but also it kind of builds up in the system, in the receptor tanks over time. And you'll notice these deposits most easily when you visit a distillery and you're looking at their showpiece, their crown jewel of the distillery, which is the spirit safe. It's always presented as being the epicenter of the distillery, where the stills that are usually behind the spirit safe are sending in their cooled new make liquor through the spirit safe, where it can be monitored and seen, and it's all clear and it's trickling like a cascading highland stream, and it looks very, very attractive and photogenic. But it's also the point really where customs and excise can monitor, or they feel they can monitor, how much alcohol is being made and what level of tax is going to be assessed for an individual distillery. It's always about the taxes. With Clynelish, part of the resting and holding process. Now, resting is where new make spirit goes into a tank and it's held briefly before going into a second tank or a third tank at what's called the bottling hall. And then from this main holding tank, the whisky is filled into casks. And what you find is when you look inside these tanks, which are usually stainless steel or cast iron, all bolted together and looking very, very charming and full of patina, you'll find in the inside they're not nice and clean. They have these kind of greasy type deposits which contain saponins and other chemical components, which are a direct result of the spirit settling in the tank and depositing some of its fatty acids. These fatty acids come from the oils in the grain, long chain proteins, and other what's called congeners. They're perfectly natural. They are perfectly good for you, because most natural things are. It's the artificial things you've got to watch out for, like chill filtration. That's what causes the damage. But Clynelish as a brand, I kind of latched on to in the late 1990s. And even then, it wasn't at its waxiness. It was about 2005, between 2005, 2015, those 10 years where it was something special. And even more special was it wasn't promoted and advertised much, although it existed. And therefore it tended to be the whisky enthusiasts that were looking for a personality single malt that really stood out, that wasn't already well known, like Lagavulin and Bowmore. And Clynelish ticked that box. So it achieved a bit of a cult status, which was then at that 90s, certainly mid-90s, late 90s. It was added to by the fact that online reviewers, a number of online reviewers, got hold of Brora from independent bottlers and discovered it was something absolutely wonderful. And Brora is the sister distillery of Clynelish, where they both share same warehouses, and the rumour goes, the legend goes, we'll go beyond rumour, it's more like a legend. The legend goes that, in fact, there were times when Brora was Clynelish and Clynelish was Brora. And that wouldn't surprise me, not in the slightest. It was all to do with basically you've got one industrial unit, you need more stills because you need more of that Highland style of whisky. So in Brora stroke Clynelish, interchangeable, both very much overlapping, but it was Brora that got this simply because at the time it was no longer being produced. Always a precursor to cult status, high desirability and big expensiveness. And of course the Broras that remained were generally in the 20s and 30s in terms of age. So you weren't getting 12-year-old Brora, much of that. That never gets talked about, funnily enough. It was the old Broras, 25, 30, 32, which have achieved this big cult status of being a magnificent top 5 distilleries ever. And Clynelish has kind of been in the wake of that reputation that Brora had for itself. But about a few years ago, and I would suggest it's probably about 2012 to 2015, probably earlier, there was a big cleaning programme at Clynelish Distillery, and they cleaned out all the tanks. Of course, they're using high-functioning industrial detergents and solvents. So this is a big deep cleaning going on. And in doing so, they absolutely, in my opinion, obliterated the signature of Clynelish. So that when you buy a bottle of Clynelish now, if you've never tasted it before, you'll say, oh, that's quite a pleasant, unpeated, fresh, fruity style of single malt. But if you're tuned into the online conversation, the online floating archive, the timelined archive that surrounds Clynelish, you soon realise that when your mate in the whisky club bought that bottle of Clynelish at auction because he sussed out that it had been bottled in 2005, and you actually sit down one evening and you pour them side by side and realise they are two completely different single malts, it's a shock. Because the new one isn't as substantial and isn't as complex and isn't as charismatic as the old one. And my opinion is Clynelish will never recover from this. Partly because there are new distilleries coming along who, one, they never made the mistake in the first place, and two, they're now being set up for yields of flavour and not technical convenience. There's now two whisky industries in Scotland. There's the one, they're separated by the fact that the corporate whisky industry is all computer controlled and AI driven, from offices, from people with degrees and whatever. Doesn't matter whether they know what they're doing or not, that's irrelevant. as long as they know how to be part of the machine as they operate their little bit of the machine. That's the main thing. And I know this sounds very Luddite and very, very cynical, and the fact is, Maltmates, I encourage you to have the same attitude as myself for one fundamental, simple, basic reason. The more profoundly cynical you are, the fewer mistakes you make when you're buying whiskey. You need your priority index. You need to know what are the top 10 single malt distilleries. What are the top 10 independent bottling brands? And what are the top 10 budget, purse-friendly, wallet-friendly, easily accessible, widely available blended malts or blended Scotch whiskies, which are going to give you a proper bang for your buck. Also, while we're talking about it, what are the top 10 distilleries that actually hold the prices down to a realistic level for their old matured whisky? Because what we're seeing at the moment is a huge tolerance for overpriced older whiskies. 21 years plus, where people are now paying, what, £1,000 for a 21-year-old whisky? Are you even kidding me? No, I'm not even trying to kid you. I'm not even kidding myself. Money has a value, and I highly recommend you do a mental exercise. And that is when you see a bottle of whiskey for £100 and you're really tempted to buy it because it's 15-year-old, it's 12-year-old, we'll call it 12-year-old. And it's from this new distillery and it's got a fancy bottle with a fancy stopper, and the brand ambassadors are telling you how fabulous it is and telling you about how amazing their life is, all blah 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 blah, waffle waffle waffle. What I recommend you do is do a calculation as to how much your £100 was worth before you paid your original tax on it. And then you'll discover it was probably worth 130, 135, 140, maybe 150 pounds, depending on your tax grading. Tax is, have a think about what tax really, really actually is. And then attach that to whiskey and how much tax we pay. And was in Britain, customs and excise duty is a form of tax. And when we buy a bottle of whiskey in Britain, in the UK, we're actually taxed 20% on the tax being deducted. Wow. Just wow. And then we sit back and see the tax revenue being absolutely squandered. Now, I'm not judging this, and I recommend you don't, because it would otherwise you'd get pretty miserable. I'm recommending you be realistic and see it for what it really, 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 really is. And understand that your money is more valuable than you think and you realise. And this is why you never borrow any more than you ever essentially have to. You never do that. Money, the whole monetary system is a Ponzi and fiat, and essentially a fraud. But it's something we all subscribed into because it makes the system manageable and navigable, particularly when we're buying whiskies. Always understand the value of a whisky. When you're looking at the price, ask yourself a question. Ask yourself several questions when you're looking at the price. Now, this was about £80, right? So I paid for it, but it's 12 years old. Look at the natural colour. There's tangible maturation. It's properly unchill filtered. It's properly natural colour. It's properly coming from an independent bottler who has a good reputation. The result is, when I paid my £80, I got to smell and taste and review a whisky, which is very, very good. And that's what makes it worth the money. If I'd paid that £80 and got something loaded with caramel industrial colouring at 40%, anemic, thin, lacklustre and disappointing, like Macallan, it's true, you know it's true, I'd have wasted my money whatever it cost me. Always remember this, if you want to know what something's worth, look at your open bottles of whisky in the shelf behind you in your bothy and say which ones am I drinking the fastest and which ones am I remembering the longest. That will tell you what something is worth. Clynelish, now there's only two ways to buy Clynelish. Forget the official bottlings in the shops. Don't touch them with a barge pole. You will only be disappointed if you really know about whisky. Leave these bottlings to the passive consumers. The bottlings you're looking for are competent, professionally delivered, independent bottlings. And the bottles at auction, which are bottled 10, 15, even 20 years ago. You'll tell by the patina, you'll tell by little details in the label, you'll tell by doing your research. That's how you buy Clynelish now. We enjoy the thrill of the chase. One thing that concerns me for a younger generation now, speaking to youngsters about it, they're not interested in alcohol at all. They realise that they are physically vulnerable to poisons and toxins in the food supply, and therefore they're hedging their bets, trying to protect them by investing in healthy lifestyle. They're buying fresh fruit and veg from a farmer's market, and they're avoiding alcohol because they perceive it to be toxic. And they talk to me because I'm the whiskey guy, so as far as they're concerned, I'm really old-fashioned. And I really love that. I love the status, being really old-fashioned. I'm old-fashioned enough to be a bit of a relic. And I still use cash all the time. I never pay with a card. I use cash. I'll tell you why I use cash. Because cash still works in a power cut. Can you imagine the catastrophic collapse of a community if someone drove a lorry into the electrical substation and all of a sudden an entire community's electric supply suddenly stopped and would remain stopped for the foreseeable future while assessments were carried out, risk assessments, health and safety checks, consultants brought in, more assessment made, tendering for the replacement parts. The more sophisticated society becomes, the more vulnerable it becomes. And the way we shield against that is by hedging. We hedge with cash, we hedge with being a cynical old bampot like myself, and you hedge with good quality single malt. Because wherever you are in the world, it's a currency that holds its value. Bye.